The walker hits the tarmac first. Metal screeches against concrete. My mother gasps. Her hand grabs my sleeve. The woman in the cobalt blazer does not even turn around. "It was blocking the boarding lane," she says. Her voice carries down the jet bridge like a verdict already decided. My mother's frame, the one thing keeping her upright after 2 hip surgeries, lies bent on the ground. One wheel spins in slow circles. Nobody moves to help. I feel my pulse in my throat. 22 years on the bench have taught me to control my face when everything inside me wants to react. I kneel beside my mother instead. I check her hands. I check her wrists. She is shaking, not from pain, but from the shame of being made small in front of 40 strangers. The woman in blue straightens her blazer and looks at her watch like this is an inconvenience she is owed an apology for. Some people, she announces to no one and everyone, should not be allowed to travel if they cannot keep up. My mother's eyes meet mine. There is fear in them and something else, the quiet hope that someone will finally do something. I stand up slowly. I do not raise my voice. I do not have to. Because in 11 days, this woman is scheduled to appear in my courtroom for sentencing. And she has no idea who I am yet. But to understand why this moment changed everything, I need to take you back to where this all began. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that 3 days earlier, I was simply a daughter trying to get her mother to a wedding on time. My mother, Eleanor, raised 4 children alone after my father passed, working double shifts at a hospital laundry service for 11 years before her body finally gave out. She never asked anyone for anything. She still apologizes to waiters for existing. The wedding was for my niece, in a small coastal town 600 miles from the courthouse where I have spent most of my adult life. My mother had not flown in 9 years. Her hips ached with every step. Her hands trembled slightly from a mild tremor the doctors were still monitoring. And she needed the walker not as a convenience but as the only thing standing between her and the floor. I had taken 2 personal days off the bench to make this trip with her. 22 years of listening to testimony had taught me to read a room before anyone spoke a word in it. That morning, the airport felt ordinary. Coffee smell, boarding announcements, a toddler laughing near the window. My mother sat in her wheelchair rental, folding her boarding pass into careful thirds the way she folds everything, out of habit from decades of having nothing to waste. I remember thinking this would be a simple day. Get her on the plane. Get her to the wedding. Watch her dance, even if just with her hands, at her granddaughter's reception. That was the entire plan. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required the 22 years of restraint I had built in a robe I wasn't wearing that day. The gate area was calm before she arrived. Passengers browsed phones. A gate agent hummed while scanning boarding passes. My mother told me a story about my father, the way she always does before something stressful, like reaching for a familiar object in the dark. I remember laughing. I remember thinking the hardest part of the day would be getting her walker folded correctly for gate check. I did not know yet how wrong I was. She arrived the way certain people always arrive, as if the air itself needed to rearrange around her. Late 40s, sharp bob haircut, a cobalt blue blazer pressed to a stiffness that suggested it had never touched a hanger it didn't approve of. Matching trousers. A designer bag held like a weapon, not an accessory. Before she reached the gate counter, she had already stopped twice to photograph the ceiling tiles, muttering about standards. She cut in front of an elderly man collecting his boarding pass, offering no apology, only a look that suggested he should have moved faster. Her first words were aimed at the gate agent, loud enough for the entire boarding area to hear. I have platinum status. I should not be waiting behind people who don't even know how to use a kiosk. The gate agent, a young man with a patient smile, tried to explain the boarding order. She cut him off with a wave of her manicured hand, as if his explanation was an insect she was swatting away. I watched her scan the gate area the way a hawk studies a field before choosing where to land. Her eyes moved past business travelers, past families, past a sleeping infant. They stopped on my mother's walker, parked neatly beside our seats. Something in her expression shifted. Interest, irritation, opportunity. I felt it before she said a word. Dread has a physical weight. It sits behind the ribs, low and cold. I felt it settle there as she started walking toward us, heels clicking against the tile in a rhythm that sounded, to me, like a countdown. She stopped in front of my mother's walker and stared at it the way someone stares at a parking violation. "This," she said, gesturing at the walker, "is a tripping hazard. Someone needs to move it." I kept my voice level. "It's tucked against the wall. It's not in anyone's way." "It's in my way," she said. "I need room for my roller bag, and I am not going to be responsible when someone falls over this thing." A gate agent stepped closer, gently explaining that mobility devices were permitted at the gate per airline policy. The woman in blue turned on him with a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you know who I fly with every single week? I could have your job before this plane even boards." Passengers nearby exchanged glances. A man 2 seats down lowered his newspaper. I felt my mother's hand find mine, gripping it the way she used to grip my hand crossing streets when I was 7 years old. I did not argue further. I simply moved the walker 2 more inches from the aisle, though it had never blocked anything to begin with. Sometimes peace costs nothing but pride, and pride is not something I've ever needed to feed. But something in her eyes told me this was not over. This was only the opening note of a much longer song. Boarding began 12 minutes later. The woman in blue pushed through priority lines meant for families with small children, ignoring the gate agent's calls for group order. She settled into first class, though her boarding pass, visible for half a second, showed economy comfort. My mother and I boarded during pre-boarding for passengers requiring assistance. Took time. Her hips do not move quickly anymore, and the aisle felt narrower than usual with the walker folded and passed to the flight crew for gate check. A flight attendant, kind-eyed and patient, helped guide her into the aisle seat. That was when the woman in blue appeared again, standing in the aisle, blocking our path with her roller bag. "You're taking forever," she said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. "Some of us have connections." My mother's face went pale. She has spent her whole life trying not to be a burden, and here was a stranger making sure an entire cabin watched her struggle. "She'll be seated in a moment," I said calmly. "Please give her room." "I don't have to give anyone room," she snapped. "This is exactly why they should make older people board separately, at a different time, so people who actually have places to be aren't stuck waiting." A woman across the aisle gasped audibly. The flight attendant's jaw tightened, but she kept helping my mother into her seat with practiced patience. I looked at the woman in blue and said only, "That's unnecessary." "Excuse me?" she said. "Who do you think you're talking to?" I said nothing further. I helped my mother buckle her seatbelt instead, my hands steady though my chest was not. 22 years of restraint told me the moment for a response had not yet arrived. But I felt the tension coil tighter in my shoulders, and I knew this would not be the last confrontation of the day. She returned 40 minutes into the flight, after the seatbelt sign went dark, walking toward the back galley for reasons that seemed to exist only to pass our row again. This time, her target was clearer. My mother had reached for her walker's small attached bag, tucked beneath the seat in front of her, to retrieve a tissue for her nose, irritated by the dry cabin air. "Is that going to be under there the whole flight?" the woman said, stopping beside our row. "It's a fire hazard." "It's a medical bag," I said. "It's compliant with FAA regulations." "I don't care what it's compliant with," she said. "I care that my flight experience is being ruined by clutter." My mother's cruel condition became her next target. "And frankly," she continued, voice pitched for the row behind us too, "if someone can't manage a flight without dragging equipment everywhere, maybe flying isn't for them anymore." The words landed like a slap. My mother's eyes filled, though she blinked hard, refusing to let them fall in public. A man across the aisle spoke up. "That's out of line," he said quietly but firmly. "Mind your business," she snapped back. A woman 1 row up turned in her seat. "She's not bothering anyone. You are." The woman in blue's face reddened, but instead of retreating, she escalated, turning to nearby passengers as if recruiting an army. Doesn't anyone else think it's ridiculous that we're all inconvenienced because someone can't travel without special accommodations? Silence answered her. Most passengers looked away, uncomfortable, but unwilling to engage further. One man, seated 3 rows back, quietly lifted his phone, angling it toward the aisle. I noticed. I said nothing. The woman in blue's frustration at being ignored seemed to fuel something worse. She reached down, grabbed the strap of my mother's medical bag, and yanked it fully into the aisle. "There," she said. "Problem solved." My mother flinched as though she'd been struck. The bag's contents spilled slightly. A blood pressure cuff, a small bottle of heart medication, reading glasses clattering against the floor. This could not go unanswered. And every person on that plane, whether they said it aloud or not, felt exactly the same thing. A flight attendant arrived moments later, drawn by the commotion, and asked what had happened. The woman in blue answered first, faster, louder, more confident than either of us. "This bag was a hazard," she said. "I was simply moving it to a safer location. If anything, I should be thanked." The flight attendant, caught between company policy and a passenger determined to make a scene, hesitated. My mother sat frozen, humiliated, gathering her spilled belongings with trembling hands while I helped her, saying nothing, feeling something sharp and quiet settling behind my eyes. "Ma'am," the flight attendant finally said to me, "could you keep the bag secured under the seat for the remainder of the flight? We want to avoid further disruption." It was, in effect, a small surrender to the loudest voice in the row. My mother had done nothing wrong, and yet she was the one being asked to comply, to shrink further, to disappear more completely. The woman in blue smiled, satisfied, and returned to her seat as though she had won a great victory. I felt something the courtroom had trained out of me for over 2 decades. The urge to react immediately, loudly, without restraint. I set it aside, not because the anger left, but because I understood, with total clarity, that patience delivered with precision cuts deeper than anger delivered in the moment. And that was when I decided that this woman had made the last mistake of her very comfortable life. The final incident came 90 minutes later, as the plane began its descent. My mother, needing to stand and stretch her stiff hips before landing, rose slowly with the aid of the seat in front of her, waiting for the aisle to clear. The woman in blue, returning from the galley one last time, did not wait. She did not ask my mother to move. She reached past her, grabbed the folded walker resting against the bulkhead where the flight crew had stored it for landing, and shoved it hard into the narrow space between rows. The walker toppled. My mother, off balance and reaching to steady herself, went down with it, catching herself against the armrest, her wrist twisting beneath her weight. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Silence followed. I did not shout. I breathed once, slow and controlled, the way I do before delivering a verdict that will change a life. I helped my mother back into her seat, checked her wrist, confirmed she could move her fingers, and only then did I turn to face the woman standing over the wreckage of my mother's dignity. "Apologize to her," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, final. The woman in blue laughed, short and sharp, the way people laugh when they believe consequences are things that happen to other people. "And who do you think you are?" she said. The cabin went still. I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the small leather folio I carry, out of habit more than necessity, the credential I rarely need to produce outside a courthouse. I opened it, held it steady, let it speak before I did. "Judge Miriam Ellison," I said. "Third Circuit Court." A woman 2 rows back inhaled sharply. A phone lowered. The man who had been recording leaned forward, capturing every second. The woman in blue's face changed in stages. Confusion first, then disbelief, then the particular shade of pale that arrives when someone realizes the floor beneath them has disappeared. I didn't," she started. "You have a sentencing hearing scheduled in 11 days, I said. "Case number 24, CR 1187. I recognized your name on the manifest before we boarded." The color drained further from her face. This is a mistake," she stammered. reaching for words that no longer existed for her. The mistake, I said, was believing cruelty has no witnesses. She opened her mouth again, some fragment of an excuse forming, but I raised one hand, and the words died before they reached the air. You'll have your chance to speak, I said. In my courtroom, under oath. A man near the front spoke into the silence, quiet but clear enough for the rows around him. She just assaulted an elderly woman on a federal flight, and it's on camera. The cabin seemed to release a breath it had been holding for hours. When we landed, 2 airport security officers were waiting at the gate, notified by the flight crew during descent. I gave a full statement, calm, precise, detailed, the same clarity I bring to every case I've ever presided over. The passenger who had been recording offered his footage without being asked twice. The woman in blue attempted one final defense as officers approached her row. I fly with this airline every week, she said. This is going to cost you your career. One officer glanced at the footage already playing on a nearby phone and did not look impressed. Ma'am, he said, you're being detained for assault and battery against a passenger with a disability, along with interference with a mobility device required under federal accessibility law. The cabin, still seated, watching the exit door, erupted into a wave of applause that no one asked them to give. My mother, cradling her wrist, began to cry. Not from pain, but from something closer to relief, the particular kind of relief that arrives when the world finally confirms what you already knew to be true. The airline issued a statement within the hour confirming the passenger had been permanently banned from all future flights, pending the outcome of the criminal complaint. The words "permanently banned" moved through the cabin like a current, passengers repeating it to each other in hushed, satisfied tones. As officers walked her off the plane, her cobalt blazer looked smaller somehow, as though the fabric itself had lost its confidence. She did not look back. The cabin felt different once she was gone. Lighter, warmer. The air itself seemed to exhale. A woman across the aisle reached over and gently squeezed my mother's good hand. You did nothing wrong, she said. None of us will forget that. The man who had recorded everything approached quietly before deplaning. I'll send you the footage, he said, in case you need it for the case. Or just so you remember she didn't get away with anything. I checked my mother's wrist again once we reached the terminal. Sprained, not broken, the paramedics confirmed. She held my hand the entire ride to urgent care, quieter than usual, though something in her posture had changed. Not smaller, steadier. I kept thinking no one would believe me, she said softly, staring out the window, that it would just be my word against someone louder. You were never alone in that cabin, I told her. Everyone saw exactly who she was. That night, in the hotel room before the wedding, she sat by the window rubbing her wrapped wrist, watching the coastal lights flicker below. I sat beside her, the day settling into something heavier than exhaustion. A quiet confirmation of something I already believed. Cruelty reveals itself eventually. It always does. Sometimes it simply takes the right person choosing patience over reaction to let it fully unfold. 11 days later, she stood before my courtroom. Not for the airplane incident, that case moved through a separate federal jurisdiction, and I recused myself from it immediately as ethics demanded. She stood before me for the original charges already filed against her months earlier. Harassment and property destruction against an elderly neighbor in her HOA community. A woman with early-stage dementia whose garden Karen had ordered destroyed over a zoning dispute that existed only in her imagination. I did not mention the flight. I did not need to. The footage had already reached the prosecutor's office through an unrelated federal filing, and it painted a portrait no character witness could undo. When I read her sentence aloud, the maximum available under the statute, given the pattern of behavior now fully documented across 2 entirely separate incidents. Her face held the same expression it wore on that airplane the moment she understood who I was. 6 months later, she lost her position on the HOA board entirely, voted out by unanimous resident count. Reports surfaced of her employer terminating her contract after the footage went viral, viewed over 40 million times under a headline she never got to control. The elderly neighbor whose garden she destroyed received a settlement. along with an apology neither party believed was sincere. My mother's wrist healed within 6 weeks. She flew again 3 months later, this time without incident, and danced slow, careful steps with her walker close beside her, at a family gathering none of us will forget. She tells the story now not with anger, but with a strange kind of gratitude, the way survivors often speak once enough time has passed to soften the edges. As for me, the case reminded me of something 22 years on the bench had already taught me, but that I needed to relearn in a much more personal way. Authority does not need volume. Cruelty always believes it is untouchable, right up until the moment it discovers it never was. Some people mistake calm for weakness. They see patience and assume there is nothing behind it. But real authority does not need to raise its voice to be heard. It only needs the truth, a witness, and the willingness to wait for the right moment to speak. If this story reminded you that dignity outlasts every cruel word spoken against it, you already know exactly what to do next.